Hello everyone, this is Venom, and we are back with our second Mothkeepers build video. Now today's video is going to be a little bit quicker. We already did the main video kind of showing how the Mothkeepers work, what it can and cannot do. Today's is going to be a different variant of that, going over the Stasis build. And the truth is, I was able to make a build for this for everything except for solar, and even then I could probably put one together and just wouldn't be kind of as fluent. It wouldn't feel like it fit quite as well as it does with the rest of the classes. But yeah, I was able to find one that also worked with Void and one that worked with Arc. I mean, they're nothing too crazy. I did look for any other hidden interactions. I did look to see if they, maybe had some buff that, worked with some other exotics, or they had some weird funky interactions. The truth of the matter is that they don't. They've got some things that they work with because of the fact that they can blind enemies and they give an overshield. But past that, the Mothkeepers just do what they do. I mean, I explained it last time. They make some pretty cool mods that will track down and attack enemies, doing massive damage to them, grenade damage, or blinding them, which in and of itself is pretty good. And of course, they can give you overshields instead. So that's not a bad thing. I mean, every exotic doesn't have to be busted in the game to work. That being said, it's still pretty decent one to play with. I was actually playing with this earlier, and again, I was able to, after I took some time getting used to it, easily go back and forth between using them as an oh shit button to get my overshield and just using them as a regular grenade. Like I said, today's build is just going to be another variant of that. It's going to help you charge your grenades up more. I will kind of go over the other two builds real quick. They're not really builds. There's more like just weapon choices. The one for Void, basically you just use the Vexcalibur and your overshield will actually work with Vexcalibur. Vexcalibur has a buff, Perpetual Loophole. It says deal additional melee damage while protected by an overshield. Defeating targets with melee final blows while the overshield is active will refresh it. That's pretty much the only thing I saw that really worked with Void. I mean, you're going to get that overshield. That's great. You can use some perks to keep that going. But past that, there was no other crazy interactions with it. Again, you don't have to have any other crazy interactions. I mean, the exotics still are pretty good by themselves. You don't need to make everything busted, just so you know that's what I found for Void. And then, of course, for Arc, since they blind enemies, they will actually work with the Spark of Brilliance. Defeating a blinded target with precision damage creates a blinding explosion. So you can go ahead and blind a powerful enemy with this, take it out with precision damage, and then that will make a blinding explosion. That would actually work pretty well in Grand Masters if you want to go ahead and blind any strong enemy, which is going to be everything basically. So you blind something, take it out with precision damage, and that's going to blind everything around you. Now, if you pair that with, say, something like the Tarnished Metal with Volt Shot, then you can easily get a precision kill with that, reload, and you can now Volt enemies. So you can do a lot of AoE damage thanks to the combinations there. Now, that being said, like I said, today we're going to be doing Stasis. Like I said, just a brief overview. I'm not going to go over the entire thing again, but the Mothkeepers will essentially turn your grenade. It'll give you 2 charges of your grenade, and will turn it into basically 2 mods that will track down and either attack targets, doing grenade damage to them, exploding, and blinding them, or if the grenade's thrown close to you, they will turn into purple mods that will give you or your allies overshield. So it's completely dependent on how many enemies are nearby and where you throw the grenade at. If there's no enemies nearby, it's going to turn into overshield because there's no enemies to track down. But if you throw the grenade near enemies, it's going to track them down and attack them instead. So it's completely dependent on how many enemies are around, where you throw the grenade, but because of that, you can control what happens with these. So like I said, we're using a Stasis build today, and it's basically going to be playing around the fact that you can use the Whisper of Shards to actually increase the grenade recharge rate very rapidly, actually. You get a lot of grenade energy back from this, but let's go ahead and start from the beginning, and then I'll go through the entire build and show you how it works. So, most of the fragments on here are not really going to do much for us. I did think about putting on the Winter's Shroud, but really you don't need to slow nearby targets for dodging. And the Touch of Winter is not going to do anything for us because that is a grenade-specific fragment. So that pretty much leaves us 2. That's going to be the Grim Harvest and the Shattered Dive, both of which are still pretty good. Grim Harvest says defeating slowed opposing combatants creates stasis shards. Those shards grant melee energy when picked up by your allies. The melee for Hunter on stasis is really good. It can slow and freeze enemies really great, and you get 2 charges of it. So with this build, you're going to have 2 charges of your melee and 2 charges of your grenade. So that is kind of cool, and the melee's not bad for this. Next up, we got Shattered Dive. Of course, if you played PvP when Beyond Light came out, you know exactly what Shattered Dive does, but for everybody else, it says activate while midair to quickly descend and shatter nearby targets on impact. This was the first dive ability that Hunters got, and this is the one that basically shatters any stasis crystals around and causes them to explode and do a ton of damage. Hunters have this ability, and it is brutal. It's very good in PvE and was a menace in PvP. Still is, to be honest, if you get caught by this. So if you're in PvP and you see any kind of stasis crystals and there's a hunter around, I wouldn't go near them. They're probably about to detonate that thing. That being said, none of these are going to matter up here. Of course, the grenade is going to be taken over by the Mothkeepers, so that doesn't matter. We only have the Withering Blades for melee. Triple jumps we're going to typically use, and then of course we're going to be using our Gambler's Dodge. You can use the Marksman's Dodge for this build if you want to, but you're going to want to go ahead and get your melee back instead for most PvE stuff. So I would go ahead and stick with Gambler's Dodge. Now, as far as the fragments, that's where the build really is going to come into being here, and it's really going to revolve around the Whisper of Shards and around the Whisper of Torment. So the Whisper of Shards is shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts your grenade recharge rate. Shattering additional stasis crystals increases the duration of this benefit. You're going to be able to recharge your grenade fairly fast, but this is going to be reliant on you creating stasis crystals. Not shards, but stasis crystals. So we're going to have to make sure we can reliably create those stasis crystals. Next up, we've got the Whisper of Torment. It says you gain grenade energy each time you take damage from targets. You're going to be taking damage no matter what you do, even in Grandmaster, so this is a good one to have to help you boost that recharge rate. So even taking damage, if nothing else is going on, is going to help you boost that as well. Now, next up, we've just got some general fragments to have on. We're going to have on the Whisper of Fissures. It says, increase the damage and size of the burst of stasis when you destroy a stasis crystal or defeat a frozen target. We are going to be shattering crystals as part of this build, so we might as well go ahead and make those crystals work for us and do damage to any targets around them. We don't want to just use them to burst and charge a grenade. Let's damage targets with them instead, so that's why we have that on there. Next up, we got the Whisper Bonds. It says, defeating frozen targets generates an orb of power. We want to generate as many orbs of power as possible to also help us generate that grenade energy. And then finally, we've got the Whisper of Conduction. It says, nearby stasis shards track your position. I like this for the additional resilience and the fact that I don't like cutting down my stasis shards, so I like them to track to me instead. Now, I get to weapons here in a moment, but first I want to go over stats. Stats are pretty much going to be what you expect for this build. You're going to max out your mobility and max out your discipline, and then whatever else you got left, you're going to go ahead and put into resilience. Stasis is a lot easier to kind of get some of these stats up a bit because some of the best shards will give you the stats you want for your hunter. As you can see, I've actually got 90 resilience and 100 mobility with 100 discipline. That's very hard to do. With most builds, you can do that with stasis a little bit easier. But, I mean, if I probably had just a little bit better armor, or just some armor with just stats in just the right slots, I probably honestly could have got triple 100s without having to put on any font mods. So, that would be pretty cool. But that being said, like I said, mobility is going to be the one you're going to max out first, then discipline, and then finally, it's going to be your resilience. And like I said, I always max out your mobility on hunters, no matter what it is you're doing, because of the fact that typically your Gambler's Dodge allows you to have basically a couple different abilities in one, especially when you have a dive ability. So with this, we've actually got the ability to shatter dive, so that's one thing we can do with our dodge. We've got the ability to get our melee back thanks to Gambler's Dodge, and of course we can dodge out of danger. So, like I said, dodge is the best tool a hunter's got because it can typically not just dodge you out of danger, we can typically use it for other things. So in this build, we can use our dodge for 3 different things. Next up, we're going to go for our mods. This is going to be pretty standard for most of these. Our helmet mods, we're going to be using our ammo finders, double heavy ammo finder for solo, or 1 heavy ammo finder and 1 heavy ammo scout for group play. Go ahead and toss on a harmonic siphon. We're going to be trying to use stasis weapons for this, so we are going to generate orbs of power using harmonic siphon. For our arms, we're going to be using the firepower mod, and then we're going to be doing focusing strike and impact induction. Firepower is going to give us orbs of power on grenade kills. The mods will count as grenade kills. Focusing Strike is going to grant us class ability when you cause damage with a powered melee attack. And Impact Induction, causing damage with a powered melee, will reduce your grenade cooldown. So one more way to get that grenade cooldown back. Now the melee on this build is not particularly strong. I mean, it is on low tier content. It can easily take out red bars. And higher tier content, it won't necessarily kill the enemies there, but it will still freeze them and even slow them down and even freeze them. And these mods play off with just the fact you can do damage with them. So we're going to go ahead and use those. We're not going to try to rely on heavy-handed because you can't necessarily always get a kill with your melee, but you can get a lot of energy by just hitting enemies with it. And your melee also bounces between enemies, so that's what we're going to be using that. Next up on our chest, we're going to be using Charged Up and a couple of reserve mods. Go ahead and just swap these out for whatever defensive mods you want to. I do like having an extra copy of Charged Up because of the mods we're going to be using to power this thing up. And the harmonic reserves are just to give my machine gun some extra ammo, but you're going to replace these with whatever reserves you want and whatever defensive mods you want. Although I would have a copy of Charge Up if you can work it in there. If not, go ahead and put on your defensive mods. Next up for legs, 2 very important mods. First, we're going to be using Stasis Weapon Surge. This is going to boost up our Stasis weapons when we have an armor charge. After that, we're going to be using Elemental Charge. Thanks to all of these Stasis shards you're going to be collecting, even if you don't get any Orbs of Power, we are going to be able to get charged up pretty reliably thanks to Elemental Charge. That's where we got that on there. So that being said, we do not have actually any mods on that are going to boost us by picking up the Orbs of Power. I do have Recuperation on. If you're doing lower tier content, you can go ahead and toss on a copy of Innervation, but you're really not going to need it for this build because we're going to be getting our grenade energy back mainly by shattering crystals. So that's why I don't have any way to charge it up by Orbs of Power. We're basically using our Orbs of Power to power up our weapons for this build. That being said, if you're comfortable having just Recuperation on to get your healing, go ahead. If you really, really want to put on an Innervation, you can. But I just like having that extra healing since I don't have any other way to really heal with this build. So Recuperation is the one I would personally go for, but you can replace that with Innervation. Or if you don't want to worry about Elemental Charge, you can go ahead and take that off and put on a copy of Absolution or a copy of Innervation instead. And then finally, we're going to have a copy of Reaper. Dodging is going to let us get an overpower and a weapon kill. We've got Time Dilation. That's going to allow our Orbs of Power to last longer. Our armor is going to stay charged longer. Since we've got on a Charge Up mod and Time Dilation, that means we can get up to 4 charges. They will last 15 seconds each, which means that if I have full charge, I've got a full minute of my Stasis weapon staying powered up. And you can typically keep that charge up fully. So that's why I've got Time Dilation on. It essentially gives me almost 2 more Orbs of Power. So it's almost like I have 4 charged up mods. I've only got 1, obviously. But by having Time Dilation on there, it's almost like I've got 4. And since I'm not using any kind of spin or special finish or anything, they're not going to be used up all in one shot. So these are going to slowly go down while I've got those charges. So that's why I've got Time Dilation on. And I just went ahead and put on a copy of Bomber afterwards so I get some grenade energy back when I use my class ability, which again, you're going to use pretty often as a hunter. Now, my last build, we used a lot of Demolitionist, and we're going to do the same thing today. I currently got a Chain of Command machine gun. It's got a Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie on it. I've still got my Water Flight on. It's got Demolitionist and Disorienting Grenades. But the main part of this build is actually going to be using the Verglass Curve. It is an exotic Stasis bow, and it's got a very special ability that is going to help us with this build. What this does is, I'm not even going to read the effect, I'm just going to tell you flat out what it does. When you get kills with this weapon, you're basically going to get a arrow charge. You're going to get a hail shot. So when you're aiming in and you get a kill, you get to store up shots, up to 5 shots. So each kill you get, you're going to get 1 more frozen arrow, 1 more hail shot. Then, when you go to hipfire the weapon, it will actually shoot out a hail arrow or a stasis arrow for each charge you have, up to 5 charges. What's going to happen is you're going to hipfire that, and each of those arrows, when it lands, if it lands on the ground, will create a stasis crystal. Now, if any of them hit an enemy, it will freeze them, which is another good way to use this bow, but we're going to try to put those stasis crystals on the ground. Now, we're going to do that because when we shatter those crystals, not only are we going to be getting a chunk or a good portion of our grenade energy recharge, because it's going to increase our recharge rate thanks to our fragment, but it's also going to explode and do a huge amount of damage to enemies around it. So not only will we be able to freeze enemies with it and get our grenade recharge a lot more, it's also going to act almost like a Trinity Ghoul. It's going to be able to do AoE damage to enemies, because when we put those crystals down and then shoot them, it's going to be doing AoE damage to enemies around there. So it's not going to be quite as good as Trinity Ghoul is, but it's just one more way to use this as a tool. So I'm going to go ahead and hop into a Lost Sector and show you guys how this build works. Alright, here on today's Lost Sector, and just as a review, remember, when we throw out our mods, if we throw them close to us, we're going to be getting mods that give us an overshield. When we throw them close to an enemy, however, they're going to turn into damaging mods. So, that's how those work. So I'm going to show you how the Verglass Curve is going to work to help you charge up your grenades with this build. So we're going to build up a couple kills. We don't even need to build them up. We can do this off of 1. So we're going to go ahead and spawn in a stasis crystal. Then we're going to break it. And you can see our grenade starts charging up very, very rapidly. We can then use that grenade. And the more kills we get, the more stasis shards we can make, the more we can break, and the more we can charge up our grenade. Alright, so I'm going to run through today's Lost Sector. We got the Scavenger's Den. I'm going to go through and use my mods as often as possible and try to get as many kills using the explosion from my arrows as I can. Cue the music. Alright, and that was pretty easy. So, that being said, I did not actually give this build a rating. You saw me go through that loss center fairly easily. I was able to take out the low tier enemies pretty quick. I would say this is a low to mid tier build. I would not take it into Grandmaster. Unfortunately, I wouldn't do it for the specific reason that you're going to need weapons to make this work, and those weapons aren't necessarily strong in Grandmasters. Now, the Hourglass Curve is the bow I used for it, even powered up using a Stasis Weapon Surge. It's not going to be doing that great in Grandmasters. Don't get me wrong, once you get kills, freezing enemies is good, but it's not going to be as easy as some other builds. You can take it in there. The curve is okay, but it's not going to be as easy or as useful as some other builds you can, but you can take it in there if you want to. That being said, I would definitely use this for low to mid tier content, just because of the fact you have to make a lot of stasis crystals to make this work, and the Hourglass Curve is the easiest and most reliable way I've found to make those. Now, you can use some other weapons, like anything that has Headstone on it will generate a stasis crystal on a headshot kill. You can use something like Deliverance with Kill or Chill Clip. You can use things like that, but they're not going to be nearly as reliable as the Hourglass Curve is. You can even use some other weapons that have, like I think the Salvation's Grip, you can use something like that, but you'll be better off using pretty much any other heavy weapon in that slot. So, that being said, again, I always got to put that PSA out there. Just because a build is rated for low to mid tier does not mean that it is bad. Just because it's not meant to go into Grandmasters does not mean it's a bad build. Grandmasters use separate builds from the low to mid tier stuff. They're going to be two totally different kinds of builds. One is not better than the other. I would not take a Grandmaster build into low to mid tier content, just like I wouldn't take the low to mid tier builds into Grandmaster. The right tool for the right job. Now, let's take a look at the fashion. I've got mostly White Wolf stuff on. I've got on the White Wolf cowl, the White Wolf vest, and the White Wolf strides. I'm currently using the Solstice cloak, the rekindled version of it, as my cloak. And I've got on the Amnes Veil for all of my shaders except for the cloak. I've got on the Ultra Plasmic. I kind of like the darker blue theme. I kind of like the blue theme for the Moss Pier. That's why I've been using a lot of blue for that one. So, I kind of like the idea that you kind of look like I know you're a hunter class, but I like the idea of looking kind of like that shadowy hunter. You got Moths that can kind of hunt down creatures for you. You kind of feel like a hunter. And with this build, everything you've got on you, your bow, your Moths, everything feels like you've got like a hunter trap on you, almost like you're a predator, you know, from the movies Alien vs. Predator. So, you've got your explosive ice, you've got your blinding Moths, you got your Moths that can track enemies down, you've got an emergency overshield on you, you can freeze enemies, you got all this different stuff you can do. So, I really like the theme for this one. So again, that's White Wolf everything except for the cloak. It's the Solstice Cloak rekindled, Amnes Veil on everything except for the cloak, which is going to be the Ultra Plasmic. This is actually a pretty fun build. You use your regular or Hourglass Curve to snipe out enemies. You can then use that Hourglass Curve shards to explode and take out enemies in a group. That was going to turn up a grenade. You can then use that grenade to take out enemies that might be running or hiding. This is actually a pretty good hunter build. This has got a lot of utility, like I said, in low to mid tier stuff. You can freeze enemies, you can now blind them, you can get overshield. There's a lot of utility in here because of the fact that those grenades give you basically 2 more utility pieces. So no matter what utility you use, no matter what build you use, the fact that you can also blind enemies and get an overshield is pretty damn fun. And those mods are relentless. They will track down enemies for quite a ways. Now they aren't infinite, they will stop after a while, but they will track for quite a ways. So that being said, that was the second build as promised. I will be getting to the other 4 builds that I promised, or the other 3 builds that I promised I'd make for Beast, but I do like to alter what classes I make my builds in first. So I'm going to be doing a Warlock build next and a Titan, and then get back to the top of his list afterwards. So that being said, thank you all for coming by, and I will see you all later.